Hello, hello, hello. This is Mr. Hurdle, and today we're going to be talking a bit about the Hebrews and kind of their vision and how it started, and with Abraham and where it went from there, and some of the problems they faced. Now, a big theme of this unit, and this is going to come up in the reading for the Socratic discussion, is the idea of the Jewish view of history and how this stands in contrast to kind of the other ancient civilizations, specifically the Mesopotamians. If you look at the Mesopotamians and even the Egyptians as well, they have what we would call a cyclical view, meaning things go and they happen in a cycle, in a circle. And in this cyclical view, when things happen in a cycle, they tend to repeat. So maybe you have something like the rising and the setting of the sun, or the phases of the moon, or the Nile going and flooding and receding. And with this cyclical view, you are just going to keep on going around and around and around in a circle. And nothing really gets any better, nothing really gets any worse. It's kind of the idea of no improvement, the idea of fate, and kind of falling to the whims of the gods. Now, the Hebrews, however, someone made the argument that one of their greatest views is that they have a linear view of history, meaning stuff gets better over time, stuff improves. And if you go and follow God's will and what He wants, there's a chance for these people to go and improve their lives, which you're going to be seeing over these next couple lectures about how the Hebrews go and try to control their destiny and to improve themselves. So, a bit of a background, if you think about Mesopotamia and kind of the idea of fate and cycles, which you saw in like the Nile flooding, receding, kind of gives you a good idea of the contrasting viewpoint of the Hebrews. Now, I'll start with the big patriarch that you got to know, and that's Abraham. But originally, he is not Abraham, he is Abram, and his wife is Sarai. Basically, there are two people living in Mesopotamia. He's basically a form of a trader. And someday, out of nowhere, God just directly speaks to him, which would be kind of cool. And God basically goes and says, hey, Abraham, you want to pick up all your stuff and move. I have a new land for you. And I describe this as two of the boldest words that have ever been spoken. Thomas Cahill argues, Abraham went, meaning he just picked up all his stuff, not knowing where he's going, and he just left. Which would be in contrast to the Mesopotamian point of view, because the Mesopotamian point of view would say, why are you doing that? Just accept your fate. You're not going to get any better. What are you talking about? So Abraham's going to go, and basically when he goes off to his land, it's not going to start off so well. It doesn't look like the kind of choice land that you want to have. God says he's going to be basically father of many nations and all this stuff, but he doesn't have any kids with his wife, so things are a little bit strange. Once Abraham goes and basically goes to the area that God tells him to go, Abraham's going to build an altar to God as a way to thank God and to honor God. In addition, there's going to be a famine at some point, and they're going to have to go to Egypt. Abraham, or Abram and Sarai, as well as there's basically it's two families leaving together, extended families. And the story in Egypt is Abram goes, and Sarai is known as an attractive woman. The Pharaoh wants her, and Abram, rather than saying, "Hey, this is my wife," kind of strangely enough, actually lies and says that Sarai's his sister. And truth eventually comes out. The Pharaoh's mad, and he basically goes and kicks them out of Egypt. Well, the idea here is if you're going to be the father of many nations, you need to have kids in order to be a father. And Abram and Sarai don't have any kids. So that is where Hagar is going to get involved, and this is where things get a bit interesting. Hagar is essentially Sarai's maid or Sarai's slave, and Sarai essentially owns Hagar, kind of tradition of the day. And the thinking behind this is that if Sarai can't have a kid, then her slave, who she owns, should have the kid for him. And basically, they set up a strange arrangement where Abram is going to conceive a child with Hagar, and they do. And they have a child, and his name is going to be Ishmael. Well, despite the fact that Sarai came up with this grand kind of strange scheme, she's obviously going to get jealous of Hagar, and she also gets jealous of Ishmael because it's not really her son, even though they kind of try to pretend it is. And Hagar and Ishmael are actually going to go run away for a period of time to try to go get away from Sarai because she's basically mad at them. Now, eventually, God is going to continue to talk to Abraham, and they're going to make a covenant. A covenant is like basically an agreement, basically saying, Abraham, if you do these things, I'll come through on my end as God. Kind of like a legal agreement, almost like a marriage or something like that. Part of it involves changing a name, which symbolically, Abram is going to change to Abraham, and Sarai is going to change to Sarah. The sign of the sign of the covenant is circumcision, which will come into play later when we talk about Christianity and the idea of what makes somebody a Christian or not. So all the males are going to be circumcised. Well, eventually, even though they're very, very old, God is going to come through on his promises, and the son Isaac is going to be born to Sarai, and that's like kind of the true son, the one that God always wanted. With Ishmael, it was almost like they were trying to force it. Now, the story gets even weirder. You're going to see with a lot of these stories, they're just quite odd, to be honest. The story gets even weirder is at some point in Isaac's childhood, so Isaac's going to grow up, God is going to go and tell Abraham, you need to go and basically kill Isaac as an offering to me, just like you would do with an animal offering. Kill him and then give him, light him on fire, essentially, burnt offering. Abraham obviously is very confused and scared, doesn't know what to do because this is God telling him to do this. It's just kind of a strange situation. And lo and behold, Abraham's going to do it. He takes Isaac up to the top of the mountain, and magnificent story, right at the last second, as he's going to go kill Isaac, an angel comes and says, you passed the test. Basically, it was a test of Abraham's faith. And he's come to this point in his life where even if God asks him to do something completely wacky, if he knows it's God, if you truly have faith in God, you're going to follow through. So a very strange test, but he does pass it. Now, Abraham's going to get old and die, same as Sarai, and this moves on to the next generation, which we'll talk here about for a second. So Isaac's going to go, and he has two different twin boys. The twin boys are Esau and Jacob. Esau and Jacob. Now, Esau and Jacob are twin boys, but back in those days, the oldest boy got everything once the dad died. That's called the birthright. Now, Esau technically came out first, so he's the older of the two. The problem is, according to Isaac's wife, or the mother of Esau and Jacob, is basically she prefers Jacob over Esau. And she wants Jacob, even though he's the younger, to get the birthright, and Jacob wants this as well. Now, Esau is known for being hairy redhead. It's one of the most famous things that he's remembered for. So the scheme that's basically hatched is that Jacob is going to go to his aging father Isaac, who can't really see. He basically goes, Jacob essentially is going to buy the birthright from Esau, kind of trick him into selling the birthright for basically a cabbage soup, something along those lines. Jacob, because Esau's so hairy, he basically puts something along the lines of animal skins on top of him, and Isaac gives him his blessing, and then he has the birthright. Esau's very mad, they go and fight, but eventually they're going to make up. But with that, we'll leave Esau to the side, and then we'll talk about Jacob here in a sec. So here's Abraham, and like I said, Abraham went his departure going into the desert and trying to follow God's will, as strange as it may be, to just pick up all your stuff and leave, kind of like Beverly Hillbillies. Here's a painting here showing, if you can try to figure this out, this is Abraham, and then the aging Sarai, and then Hagar the maid. Another very famous painting. This is Isaac in the moment of him going to be sacrificed. He's dropping the knife, and then the angel saying, you passed the test, you have the faith. Well done. Now, Jacob, who we just learned about, Jacob's also known as Israel. He's going to have a bunch of boys, 12 boys to be exact. And with a group of that many boys, you're going to have a favorite. And his favorite is Joseph. And Joseph is obviously his favorite. This is from his favorite wife. And his father likes to spoil him. And one of the famous examples is that he basically gives Joseph this beautiful coat of many colors. And Joseph is known as kind of a little bit of an arrogant kid. He goes and interprets people's dreams, annoys his brothers, kind of goes and wears his coat of colors around town, and is not too well liked by his brothers. Now, his brothers do something I don't recommend doing to a sibling that you don't like. They actually go and sold him into slavery. A caravan's going by of traders basically going to Egypt, and they come up with a scheme. Basically, they throw him in a pit, beat Joseph up, and then go take his rags, basically what's left over, and put some blood on him and tell Jacob that a lion must have got him or something along those lines. So Joseph is actually sold by his own brothers into slavery into Egypt. That's pretty bad. His master, the master that Joseph is going to go to, his name is Potiphar. And Potiphar is his master. But Potiphar isn't as important as Potiphar's wife. Potiphar is going to go off to work every day, and Potiphar's wife is going to go try to seduce Joseph every day. But he resists her advances. And he's going to resist and resist and resist. And eventually tick off Potiphar's wife to the point that she's going to go make a very serious accusation against Joseph. She's going to say that he tried to rape her, which is very, very serious, obviously. And rather than going and being killed, Potiphar is angry and goes and decides to throw Joseph into jail. So he goes even lower, and he's going to go into jail from a slave, and then he's falsely accused of sexually assaulting Potiphar's wife, and now he's sent to prison. Now, while he's in prison, he's going to meet some buddies in prison. One's going to be the baker, and one's going to be the butcher. The cupbearer. Both these people have dreams, and essentially Joseph is going to do his old dream interpretation, dream analysis. And what happens, he says, the cupbearer, your dream, you're going to get out of here, and the baker, you're going to die. And lo and behold, that's what happens. And he says, hey, cupbearer, remember me when you get out? The cupbearer actually doesn't remember him for like 2 years. But the Pharaoh is going to go, the Pharaoh of Egypt, because we're in Egypt, he's going to have some very strange dreams. He's going to have one dream, basically, where 7 skinny cows eat 7 fat cows, and 7 skinny ears of corn eat 7 fat ears of corn. And he's really disturbed by this, and he's trying to figure it out. And the cupbearer, finally, is going to remember his old buddy Joseph, who remembered his dream while in jail. And he tells the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh says, bring him up here. And Joseph interprets the dream. Here is how Joseph interprets the dream with the 7 skinny cows and the ears of corn. He basically says there's going to be 7 really good years of harvest. And during those years of harvest, you need to save up all your crops, because then there's going to be 7 years of famine, of drought. And if you store it up, then you're going to be good. They take Joseph's advice, and lo and behold, that's exactly what happens. Everywhere else is starving, and Egypt is doing all right. So Joseph actually goes and gets promoted to vizier, basically like number 2 man, right-hand man, basically the vice president of Egypt. This guy goes from being a slave to being in prison to being the right-hand man. Now, things get a little bit more interesting. Joseph's old brothers, who throw him into a pit and sold him to slavery, they're going to come to Egypt because they need food because of this famine. And I won't go into too much of the details. They don't recognize Joseph, but Joseph recognizes them, so he messes with them a bit. He holds one of them hostage. He plants a cup in one of their bags to go and pretend that they're stealing. But end of the story, they end up making up, and yay, family is all happy. So some family issues there, selling people into slavery, and he actually rises up to be the number 2 guy in Egypt. The family end up kind of making up in the end, which is sometimes good for these Bible stories to end happy. Then it gets awkward here. What's going to happen is the Bible doesn't really tell us what happened, why the Hebrews are going to be treated so poorly, but after Joseph, basically there's going to become a Pharaoh at some point that does not like the Hebrews, and they're all going to be enslaved. So that's where we'll pick it up with Moses. Now Moses, where did he come from? The origin here is that Moses, because all of these Hebrew males need to be killed according to the Pharaoh in Egypt, and they're all slaves now, his mom sent him down a river in a basket and was actually raised by Pharaoh's daughter as an adopted daughter into the palace. So he's an adopted Egyptian, essentially. Moses is going to grow up, and eventually he's going to be spoken to by God through the image of the burning bush. And God's going to tell him, basically, you're going to lead my people out of slavery in Egypt and into the promised land. You're the guy to do it. Moses says, I can't do it. I have a speech problem. I stutter when I speak. And God basically says, I'll give you the skills. I'll do what you need to do. So he gives him some skills, like he can go basically kind of like magical powers. And God's going to help him out a bit because the Pharaoh's not going to let the people go. And the famous story of basically the Pharaoh's going to be faced, and all of Egypt's going to be faced with a bunch of the different plagues. You don't need to know plagues, but you know the idea. Locusts, livestock, frogs, stuff like that. And Pharaoh still says, no, 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 until the very, very important time of Passover. Basically, with Passover, everybody that was a Hebrew, that was Jewish, was going to go and take the blood of a lamb, put it over the door. And the Spirit of God was basically going to go pass over, if you get the word there, pass over Egypt that night. And the oldest son in the family would die. And finally, was Passover. When that happens, all the Jews are protected, and everybody else in Egypt, all the sons are going to die. And at that point, the Pharaoh says, all right, you guys can go. Now, with the Passover, that's going to lead to the Exodus. The word Exodus, you kind of hear it there. It's the exit. It's the leaving of Egypt by Moses. And with the Exodus, the idea of the Passover and Exodus is huge. Arguably, because we're going to keep on visiting, this is a huge theme of the Bible, God coming through, God providing salvation, especially when we talk about the Babylonian captivity. The God that will get them out of this situation. You'll see it again and again with the Greeks and the Romans. Famously, they get to the Red Sea. We don't know really, it's called the Sea of Reeds, where exactly this was, how this happened. We talked about in class. But the idea here is that Moses parts the Red Sea, And Pharaoh changed his mind and he's chasing them down. And the people, the Israelites, are going to be able to make it out of Egypt and closer and closer to the promised land. So there you go. The big three, Abe, Joe, and Mo. And we'll pick it up next time and see how Moses turned out.